Apple TV Plus pulled out the big guns in this World War II biopic that tells the incredible true story of the American 8 Air Force, led by the brave young pilots that put their lives on the lines to take the fight to the German army in the skies. Starring Anthony Boyle, Callum Turner, and Austin Butler, who you may remember from his fantastic portrayal of Elvis back in 2022. And this show is stacked on the crew side of the house with Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks producing alongside John Orloff, who brought us Band of Brothers in the writer's seat. The series is based on Donald L. Miller's novel by the same name and focuses heavily on the characters and the lengths they were willing to go to as they risked everything to take down the Nazis. So I'm going to kick things off with what I liked, and let me tell you, there is a lot to appreciate here. The thing that stands out immediately is the attention to detail with production. The set and costume design are so well done that I felt like I was experiencing this show on a different level. During the first episode, I was reminded of how I felt when I watched Indiana Jones as a kid, and I think it comes down to all the finer details like the set design that made you feel like you were inside these rooms back in the 1940s. Or the costumes with the various textures, colors, and utility that it was as if I knew how they might feel between my fingers or how comfortable and warm the jackets might feel if I were wearing them. I don't know how involved Spielberg was in all of this, and quite honestly, I didn't even know Spielberg was involved in this until after I watched it all, but I just find it interesting that as I was watching it, I immediately had flashbacks back to Indiana Jones and how watching that made me feel. So it leads me to believe he played a pretty large role in the production here as well. The next thing I appreciated about this series was the use of CGI, which was incredibly well done. There's no shortage of flight sequences in this show, many of which involve hundreds of airplanes whipping about in the skies, getting shot down, and a bunch of other stuff, and the CGI was barely noticeable, and when it paired with shots of our characters inside the planes, it felt like we were there with them up in the skies of Western Europe back in World War II. And I think it's important to call this out because if that CGI element was not good, I think it would have removed us from this experience quite a bit, so I think it's important to call that out and really appreciate how well done it was. Okay, moving on to the story, which is where I begin to struggle a bit, but bear with me, and as you do, don't forget to subscribe for more streaming recommendations right here on my channel. Most of the early episodes are character introduction and development, with the story arc of each episode taking a bit of a formulaic approach. In the first 4 to 5 episodes, it honestly felt like a copy-paste approach of various missions in which our men faced a multitude of challenges they had to overcome in order to make it back to base safely. I will say that each episode did do a good job of starting and finishing subplot points and not leaving us with cliffhangers at the end of each one, which I found to be quite refreshing and personally really appreciated. I do wonder how that will work with audiences though, as they have to wait a week between each episode. Is it possible that the lack of cliffhangers will reduce the urge for audiences to come back? I'm not sure, but I will tell you why I think you should watch this thing all the way through. By the 5th episode, I was feeling pretty burned out by that formulaic approach I was talking about a moment ago, because it just didn't feel like we were advancing much in the story. But then we get to episode 6, and let me tell you, episode 6 is where things really begin to take off as we reach levels of suspense we hadn't had up to this point, and they mostly remain there through the end of the finale. And I can't forget these guys who show up in episode 8 that are freaking amazing and bring an entirely new element to the show that hadn't been there, and they really elevate the story and shed even more light on the nuances of the war and our military approach back then. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'll say that after the midpoint of this show, that formulaic approach just goes away. There's like 3 or 4 different plot points and storylines that branch, and you begin following those through the rest of the show. And it gets really, really good, and you're strapped in for an emotional and intense final few episodes. I'll admit, in the final episode, I legitimately felt a few tears come to my eyes, which I was not expecting considering how I was feeling about this show in the first half. As a whole, this is a remarkable true story about some insanely young people that made a lasting impact on the world, and if you keep that in mind as you watch, it really makes you appreciate it on an entirely different level. While I don't think this show is for everyone, I strongly recommend it for those of you who enjoy historic television or movies, and even if you just enjoy Spielberg, I think you'll really like this because, like I said, this thing just feels like Spielberg, and it's that experience that seems to be something that only he can provide. I think it was just awesome to be immersed into this show that just feels like something so unique to Spielberg. Masters of the Air lands over on Apple TV Plus, with the first 2 episodes premiering on January 26th and the remaining 7 episodes dropping every Friday thereafter. That'll do it for my thoughts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.